The studio lights glared down as the cameras rolled, and millions of viewers tuned in for what they thought would be just another heated debate. Pam Bondi, with her trademark smirk and sharp cadence, leaned forward, ready to land the kind of soundbite that cable networks feast on. She fired off a line dripping with condescension, her words cutting through the air like a blade meant to humiliate. The audience tensed. Some nodded along, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. It was a classic Bondi moment, loud, brash, and meant to dominate. But then, across from her, Judge Chen didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even blink. Instead, he let the silence hang just long enough to unsettle the room. His eyes narrowed with calm precision, the weight of his presence commanding attention. And then he spoke. Just one line, measured, deliberate, devastating. The words landed like a gavel strike, echoing through the chamber, slicing through the arrogance, shattering the smug confidence Bondi had wrapped herself in. For a heartbeat, the entire stage froze. Gasps erupted from the audience, the kind of involuntary reaction that comes when dignity suddenly demolishes bluster. Even the cameras seemed to lean closer, desperate to capture the shock etched across Bondi's face. She tried to respond, lips trembling with a half-formed rebuttal, but the momentum was gone. Chen had stripped her performance of its power and, in that single moment, the entire balance of the debate shifted. What was meant to be her stage had suddenly become his. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with judgment, with respect, with awe. Those watching at home leaned forward, some whispering under their breath, others grabbing their phones to clip the moment before it even finished. Social feeds lit up instantly. Did you hear what he just said? Bondi got wrecked. Judge Chen, absolute legend. And yet, as monumental as that line was, as devastating as its impact seemed, in the moment, it was only the beginning, because behind those few words lay a storm of history, of character, of a clash that spoke to something far greater than two people on a stage. What unfolded next would leave not just Bondi stunned, but the entire nation talking. To understand why that single line from Judge Chen struck like lightning, you have to understand the battlefield it was delivered on. This wasn't some routine exchange of opinions, the kind of staged drama audiences had grown numb to. No, this moment was layered with history, identity, and the very soul of American values. At the center of it all was Pam Bondi, a name already synonymous with controversy, combative television appearances, and a fiery allegiance to Donald Trump. For years, Bondi had built her brand on outrage. She stormed through cable news panels, like a general marching into war, leaning on interruptions, raised eyebrows, and biting quips to drown out her opponents. She was polished in her aggression, rehearsed in her attacks. To her supporters, she was fearless. To her critics, she was arrogance personified. And on this stage, she believed she had the upper hand. But across from her sat Judge Chen. Unlike Bondi, Chen didn't thrive on spectacle. He wasn't cut from the cloth of political theater. His power came not from volume, but from the quiet authority of a man whose life embodied the very ideals the Constitution was meant to protect. A son of immigrants, raised on the values of sacrifice, discipline, and service, Chen had fought his way through the corridors of American law, earning respect at every step. To the casual viewer, he may have looked calm, even understated. But to those who knew him, that calm was his weapon. And that's what made this confrontation so combustible. It wasn't just Pam Bondi versus Chen. It was performance politics versus principled leadership. It was bluster versus dignity. It was a clash that mirrored the broader conflict ripping through America. Who gets to define patriotism? Who gets to command respect? Who gets to shape the nation's story? Bondi leaned in, hurling accusations designed to sting, each word crafted to strip Chen of authority. She called his impartiality into question. She mocked his background, her tone dripping with the implication that he wasn't one of us. It was the same coded language America had heard for generations, an attempt to cast outsiders as illegitimate, to remind viewers of invisible lines drawn around belonging. But here's the twist. This wasn't just another pundit she was sparring with. This was a federal judge whose very life contradicted her attack. And though Chen sat silently in those opening moments, his presence was already telling its own story. The audience could feel it. They could sense the collision of two worldviews. One, loud, divisive, grasping for attention. The other grounded, steady, waiting for the exact moment to strike with truth. Social media watchers knew something was building. People at home muttered, "He's going to say something. Just wait." And when it came, that something wasn't just for the stage, wasn't just for Pam Bondi. It was for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. It was for every immigrant family that had sacrificed for a dream. It was for every quiet fighter who refused to bow to arrogance. The stakes were no longer about who would win an argument on live TV. The stakes were about which vision of America would triumph. And what happened next would prove that when arrogance meets integrity, the result is unforgettable. To truly grasp the weight of Pam Bondi's downfall in that moment with Judge Chen, we have to peel back the layers of who she is and why her name sparked such visceral reactions across the political spectrum. Because Bondi wasn't just any political commentator parachuting into a debate. She was the embodiment of a certain kind of politics, brash, unapologetic, and relentlessly self-promotional. Pam Bondi's rise began in Florida, where she carved out her image as a tough-on-crime prosecutor before climbing into statewide office as Florida's Attorney General. At first glance, she carried the aura of a reformer, promising to clean up corruption and fight for the people. But very quickly, the sheen began to fade. She became known less for justice and more for her entanglements in political theater. One of the most defining and damning moments came when reports surfaced that Bondi's office declined to investigate Trump University after receiving a sizable campaign donation from Donald Trump himself. To her critics, it was the smoking gun, a transaction that looked far more like protection money than principled governance. To her defenders, it was politics as usual, but the image stuck. The people's lawyer now looked more like the powerful's lawyer. And yet, far from being sidelined by controversy, Bondi leaned into it. She became a fixture on Fox News, morphing from state official to national political personality. Her sharp features, platinum hair, and unwavering defense of Trump made her a reliable soldier in the culture wars. Whenever the former president needed someone to go on television and reframe scandal as strength, Bondi was there. Loyal, unflinching, and eager for the spotlight. Her style was unmistakable. She didn't argue points so much as bulldoze them. She interrupted. She laughed off opposing facts. She weaponized charm one moment and sneers the next. Audiences knew what to expect. Bondi would be loud, she would be combative, and she would always turn the focus back to herself as the righteous defender of her cause. But beneath that polished television veneer lurked contradictions. Here was a politician who wrapped herself in the banner of law and order, while standing by one of the most legally embattled figures in modern American history. Here was a woman who claimed to fight corruption while surrounded by whispers of backroom deals. The dissonance between what she preached and what she practiced created a fragility in her image, though she was adept at masking it with bravado. And that fragility was on full display in debates like the one with Judge Chen, because for all her confidence, Bondi thrived on controlling the room. She needed interruptions, applause lines, friendly moderators, or sympathetic co-panelists. What she couldn't withstand, what she was never prepared for, was someone who refused to play her game, someone who would let her run the full course of her performance, only to dismantle it with a single piercing line. That's why her exchanges with Chen carried such symbolic weight. On paper, Bondi was the more practiced debater, the veteran of countless on-air brawls. She came armed with talking points and the arrogance of someone who had never truly been held accountable on live television. But what she didn't see, what she couldn't anticipate, was that her greatest weapon, her bravado, was also her greatest weakness. Because bravado collapses under the weight of truth when delivered at the right time, in the right way. In that moment, the audience wasn't just watching Pam Bondi. They were watching the unraveling of a persona carefully built over years. The sneer, the smirk, the perfectly coiffed hair, all the trademarks of her media presence, suddenly seemed hollow when confronted by Chen's quiet dignity. It was the villain's mask slipping, the facade cracking in real time. And that's why this wasn't just a debate, it was a reckoning. Pam Bondi, the self-styled warrior, found herself cornered not by someone louder or flashier, but by someone whose very life story undermined her narrative. For years, she had thrived on painting opponents as weak, unpatriotic, or illegitimate. But in Judge Chen, she faced a man whose very existence embodied patriotism, resilience, and legitimacy at the highest levels of the American judiciary. The clash was inevitable. The downfall, in retrospect, was unavoidable, because Bondi wasn't just arguing against Edward Chen. She was arguing against everything he represented: fairness, dignity, and the quiet strength of lived truth. And in that fight, arrogance never stood a chance. The nation was about to see why. To understand why Judge Edward Chen's words carried such devastating force, you need to step back and look at the life that shaped him. His story was not written in sound bites or spun into cable news drama. It was forged in the quiet resilience of an immigrant family, in the struggle for belonging, and in the steady climb toward justice. Every chapter of his life was preparation for the moment when he would face down arrogance with dignity and win. Edward Chen was born in Oakland, California, the son of Chinese immigrants who came to the United States with little more than grit and a dream. His parents worked tirelessly, his father in a grocery store, his mother balancing household duties with part-time jobs, just to give their children a shot at something better. Chen grew up surrounded by the unspoken lessons of sacrifice: long hours, missed meals, quiet perseverance. These weren't abstract values. They were lived truths. As a child, Chen understood what it meant to be treated as an outsider: the whispers, the slights, the subtle question, "Where are you really from?" But rather than turning bitter, those experiences planted a fire in him. He came to see law not as a distant institution, but as the very tool that could level the playing field, the shield that could protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful accountable. That conviction would guide every step of his career. He excelled in school, his sharp mind and calm focus setting him apart. After years of relentless effort, he found himself at the prestigious University of California, Berkeley, where he graduated, Phi Beta Kappa. From there, he pursued a law degree, immersing himself not just in statutes and precedents, but in the deeper moral questions of justice. For Chen, law was never about technicalities. It was about humanity. It was about using the structure of the system to defend dignity, even for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Early in his career, Chen worked as an attorney for the American Civil Liberties Union. There, he fought battles that went to the very heart of identity and belonging: cases on discrimination, free speech, civil rights. These weren't glamorous roles. They didn't make him a household name, but they built his reputation as a man of principle, a lawyer who didn't chase headlines but chased justice. His work reflected the quiet ethos he had inherited from his family: do the right thing, even when no one is watching. That ethos followed him into the federal judiciary. In 2011, after a bruising confirmation process, Edward Chen was appointed as a United States District Judge for the Northern District of California. His confirmation wasn't smooth. Opponents tried to paint him as too liberal, too sympathetic to marginalized communities. But in truth, those very qualities became his strength. His calm demeanor, his refusal to grandstand, his ability to listen deeply and judge fairly, these are the qualities that made him stand out. It was no accident that when Chen sat across from Pam Bondi, the balance of power shifted even before he spoke. He carried into that room decades of lived integrity, decades of public service unmarred by scandal. He didn't need to shout because his life story shouted for him. He didn't need to boast because his record was his testimony. And the contrast couldn't have been sharper. On one side, Bondi, seasoned in spectacle, basking in attention, wielding arrogance like a weapon. On the other, Chen, seasoned in service, grounded in humility, wielding truth like a scalpel. The drama wasn't just in their words. It was in the clash of who they were. Chen's immigrant background gave his every word a resonance Bondi could never match. When she questioned his authority, it wasn't just a jab at him. It was a jab at every immigrant family that had sacrificed for a better life. When she sneered at his calmness, she was mocking not weakness, but restraint born of discipline. And when Chen finally struck back with that one devastating line, the audience wasn't just hearing a judge shutting down a politician. They were hearing the voice of someone who had lived the American story, who had carried the weight of exclusion and turned it into strength. That's why his silence was so powerful. That's why his composure unnerved her. Chen didn't just bring facts to the debate. He brought authenticity. And authenticity, in a world flooded with performance, is the most unshakable force of all. This was the essence of Edward Chen's character. A man who rose not by tearing others down, but by lifting truth up. A man who faced arrogance with patience, who endured slights with dignity, and who believed deeply in the promise of justice. And on that stage, in that clash with Bondi, every lesson, every sacrifice, every battle he had fought, converged into one defining moment. He wasn't just defending himself. He was defending the values his parents had instilled, the rights he had spent his life protecting, and the America he believed in. Pam Bondi didn't know it yet, but she wasn't sparring with just another opponent. She was sparring with a man whose entire existence was the answer to her arrogance, and as the debate pressed forward, the tension only grew. Because every insult she hurled was one step closer to the moment she could not escape. The moment when Chen would finally respond, and her entire performance would collapse. The stage was set like a powder keg, every exchange sparking hotter than the last. Pam Bondi leaned forward, her voice sharp and unrelenting, trying to dominate the conversation before it could even begin. She interrupted, talked over, and sneered with practiced ease, the way she always had on cable news panels. Her confidence was unmistakable. She thought she could steamroll Judge Edward Chen the same way she had bulldozed countless opponents. But this wasn't just another panel, and Chen wasn't just another face in the crowd. He sat upright, his hands folded neatly, his eyes fixed on her with a calm so steady it felt unnerving. He let her have the floor, let her run her performance, let her spit out accusations designed to humiliate. The more she spoke, the more the audience leaned back, sensing that her attacks were bouncing against something she couldn't penetrate. "Judge Chen," Bondi said with mock deference, "you may wear the robe, but that doesn't make you the voice of the American people. Maybe in San Francisco, but not in the real America." Her words dripped with the familiar sting of coded exclusion, a thinly veiled jab at his heritage and his coastal courtroom. There were gasps in the room, some of shock, others of anticipation. Viewers at home reached for their phones, typing furiously into live chats and Twitter threads. The tension was building like a drumbeat. Chen didn't flinch. He simply tilted his head, eyes narrowing slightly, as though weighing her words on invisible scales. And then, with the same unshakable composure, he allowed her to continue. Bondi grew bolder, mistaking his silence for weakness. She pushed harder, raising her voice, gesturing with her hands, circling her rhetoric back to the same themes. That Chen didn't represent real Americans, that his authority was out of touch, that he was too soft to stand against the values she claimed to defend. Her words began to sound more like shouting than debating. The audience shifted in their seats. Some were uncomfortable, others enthralled. The energy in the room was raw, electric. You could feel the divide widening, not just between two people, but between two visions of the country. And through it all, Chen remained a fortress of silence and patience. He didn't need to interrupt, because every second of restraint made Bondi's aggression look more desperate. Every pause made the audience more aware of the imbalance on stage. Every calm glance reminded everyone watching that true authority doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't need to. At one point, Bondi smirked, her voice rising to a near shout. "If you can't handle the fire, Judge, maybe you shouldn't be sitting there at all." That was it. The line hung in the air, dripping with arrogance, begging for a response. The audience leaned forward. The silence stretched. You could almost hear the collective thought. What is he going to say? And in that stillness, The balance of power shifted. The room that had been vibrating with Bondi's noise suddenly fell quiet, waiting, anticipating. Chen had not spoken yet, but everyone knew he was about to. The villain had overplayed her hand. The hero was poised to strike. And when his words finally came, they would not just answer her, they would dismantle her. The nation had no idea that the next moment, the next sentence, would etch itself into political memory. The silence was unbearable. Pam Bondi had just sneered, "If you can't handle the fire, Judge, maybe you shouldn't be sitting there at all." Her words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. She expected Chen to stumble, to defend himself nervously, to meet her fire with timid protest. That was her game. Provoke, dominate, overwhelm. But Judge Edward Chen wasn't playing her game. He leaned forward slightly, his expression calm, unshaken, almost surgical in its precision. The pause stretched long enough to make even the cameras zoom in, searching his face for the response. The audience leaned forward, breaths caught. And then, with the measured tone of someone who had weighed every syllable before speaking, Chen delivered the line that would shatter the moment and her composure. "You mistake noise for strength, Miss Bondi. Fire burns bright, yes, but it consumes itself quickly. Integrity, on the other hand, endures." The words dropped like a hammer, sharp, clean, irrefutable. The room erupted, not in cheers, but in that unmistakable collective gasp that comes when arrogance is publicly dismantled. Some in the audience covered their mouths, others shook their heads with stunned laughter. Even Bondi's supporters froze, caught off guard by the elegance of the blow. And Pam Bondi herself, so often ready with a comeback, sat blinking, lips parting in disbelief, as if the oxygen had been sucked out of her. Chen didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He let the line hang in the air, its echo doing the work for him. That was his genius, the restraint, the confidence, the absolute command of timing. He knew the moment belonged not to theatrics, but to truth delivered. With precision. Bondi scrambled to recover. Well, that's a nice speech, Judge," she stammered, forcing a laugh. But the quiver in her tone betrayed her. Her smirk faltered. She searched for footing but found none. Because the beauty of Chen's line wasn't just in the words, it was in what they represented. His calmness embodied integrity. His silence before speaking embodied discipline. And his takedown revealed just how flimsy her bluster really was. The audience could feel it. This wasn't just a rhetorical win, this was a dismantling. It was the moment the villain's mask cracked wide open. And Chen wasn't done. Still composed, he leaned back and continued, his tone measured, each word deliberate. "Real strength, Miss Bondi, is not found in shouting the loudest. It is found in standing firm when others would bend, in protecting the rights of those who cannot shout at all. That is the duty of a judge. That is the duty of anyone who claims to serve the American people." You could hear a pin drop. The weight of his words pressed down on the room. This wasn't a counterpunch. It was a masterclass in moral authority. Bondi shifted in her seat, her bravado shrinking by the second. And then came the coup de grace. Chen's eyes fixed on her, unwavering. His voice dropped lower, firmer. A line delivered not just to her, but to every immigrant child watching. Every marginalized voice silenced. Every viewer tired of arrogance passing as leadership. "I stand here today because my parents believed in the promise of this country. They sacrificed so their children could belong, even when voices like yours tried to tell them they didn't. So when you question whether I represent America, understand, this, I am America." The eruption was instantaneous. Applause thundered across the room, louder than anything Bondi had provoked. The audience rose to their feet. Social media timelines exploded as viewers clipped the moment and hit post before the echo had even faded. Judge Chen just destroyed Bondi. This is the line of the year. Goosebumps. Bondi visibly rattled, attempted a smile, but it came off hollow. Her eyes darted nervously, searching for a foothold. But the debate was no longer hers to command. The power had shifted entirely. And yet, Chen didn't bask in the applause. He raised a hand gently, signaling for calm, and the crowd gradually quieted. His restraint made the moment even more powerful. He wasn't milking the spotlight, he was owning it by refusing to chase it. Bondi tried again, her voice sharper now, defensive. Judge Chen, with all due respect, I think the American people want fighters, not philosophers. We don't need speeches, we need action. Chen tilted his head, unshaken. Action without principle is chaos, Miss Bondi, and chaos never serves the people. It only serves those who thrive on division. Another gasp, another shiver through the audience. Bondi's face flushed. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For perhaps the first time in her career, she had no comeback. The camera zoomed in, capturing every flicker of expression. Her faltering smirk, his steady gaze, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. And for viewers at home, it was electrifying. This wasn't just debate. This was theater, history, justice wrapped into one defining moment. People began tweeting furiously. Chen just body-slammed her with facts and dignity. Did you see Bondi's face? Priceless. Somebody make that into a meme immediately. What made Chen's counterattack legendary wasn't that it was loud or aggressive. It was that it exposed Bondi's entire persona for what it was. Hollow, combustible, fleeting. He didn't need to destroy her. She destroyed herself, the moment his truth revealed her emptiness. And while the crowd applauded and the internet erupted, Judge Chen sat still, his hands folded, his expression as calm as it had been before. He spoke. That was the mark of true authority, not seeking validation, but letting truth speak for itself. Bondi never recovered that night. No matter how many interruptions she attempted afterward, no matter how many sound bites she tried to launch, the audience no longer heard her. They were still echoing with Chen's line, I am America. It was the mic drop moment of the decade. And yet, as powerful as that exchange was, the real shockwave was still to come. Because when the clip hit the internet, when it left the room and entered the bloodstream of social media, the moment transformed from a debate victory into a cultural earthquake. The aftershocks would be impossible to ignore. The moment the debate wrapped, the studio was buzzing like a hive. Producers whispered frantically into headsets, analysts scribbled notes, and journalists refreshed their feeds, watching the clip of Judge Edward Chen's mic drop line explode across social media. Pam Bondi hurried off stage, her usual confident stride stiffened into something more forced, more defensive. She smiled for the cameras, but her eyes betrayed the sting. She knew what had just happened. The night would not be remembered for anything she said. It would be remembered for how Edward Chen shut her down with a single devastating truth. Meanwhile, Judge Chen remained calm, unbothered by the circus. He spoke briefly with moderators, shook a few hands, and then quietly exited the stage as if he hadn't just become the face of the night's biggest story. That contrast, Bondi's rattled defensiveness against Chen's serene composure, only amplified the viral storm that followed. Within minutes, hashtags began trending. #I am America, #Chen vs Bondi, and simply Chen. The clip of his line racked up hundreds of thousands of views in under an hour. By morning it was everywhere. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts. Memes flooded timelines. One image showed Bondi's stunned face with the caption, "When integrity walks into the room." Another paired Chen's line with fireworks in the background. Fire burns bright, but integrity endures. But it wasn't just internet jokes. It was commentary, essays, and think pieces that carried the moment into deeper waters. Political commentators from across the spectrum weighed in. Some conservatives dismissed Chen as a performer in robes, but even they had to acknowledge the skill with which he dismantled Bondi's attack. Progressives and moderates, however, hailed him as the embodiment of what they craved in public figures. Calm, principled strength that didn't need to shout to be heard. News outlets ran with headlines like, Judge Chen's one line that silenced. The room Pam Bondi meets her match on live TV. The viral moment that redefined debate night editorials went further, placing Chen's words in a broader context. They reminded audiences of his history, the son of immigrants, a man who had risen through discipline, education, and unshakable integrity. They connected his line to the struggles of millions who had been told they didn't belong, who had been made to feel like outsiders in their own country. Suddenly, his words weren't just about a debate. They were about identity, belonging, and the American dream. For Pam Bondi, the fallout was brutal. Clips of her stumbling response replayed endlessly, overshadowing any argument she had tried to make that night. Critics called her rattled, unprepared, and outclassed. Even allies in her camp admitted privately that Chen had landed a blow she couldn't recover from. On the flip side, Edward Chen found himself at the center of a cultural wave. Invitations poured in, from late-night talk shows, podcasts, and political roundtables. College students began sharing his quotes as motivational lines. Protest signs and murals popped up in cities with his words, "I am America." It wasn't just a debate moment anymore. It was a rallying cry. And yet, the man at the center of it all didn't chase the spotlight. Chen declined most interview requests, sticking to his work, refusing to let the frenzy define him. That restraint only deepened the respect people felt. Here was a man who could have basked in the glory, but chose instead to stay grounded, proving his words weren't just performance, they were principle. But not everyone celebrated. Political rivals began spinning narratives, painting Chen as elitist, out of touch, or too polished. Conservative pundits mocked the audience's reaction, trying to frame the moment as theatrics. Bondi herself attempted damage control, giving interviews where she brushed off Chen's line as just rhetoric. But it was too late. The internet had spoken, and once a moment becomes a meme, no spin can erase it. The ripple effect reached far beyond politics. Teachers quoted Chen in classrooms, church leaders used his words in sermons, activists carried them into rallies. Even corporate training sessions began citing the exchange as an example of leadership under pressure. What Bondi thought would be a knockout punch became a career-defining misstep. And what Chen delivered as a calm rebuttal transformed into a cultural turning point. His line didn't just win a debate, it tapped into something deeper in the American psyche, the desire for integrity over bluster, for strength rooted in principle, not volume, for the reminder that America isn't defined by those who shout the loudest, but by those who stand the firmest. By the end of the week, one truth was undeniable. Judge Edward Chen hadn't just shut down Pam Bondi. He had ignited a conversation that stretched far beyond that stage. His words had become part of the national dialogue, echoing across social media, classrooms, workplaces, and homes. And in a world addicted to noise, his calm, devastating precision proved one thing. Sometimes the quietest voice leaves the loudest. Echo. In the end, this debate wasn't really about one judge and one attorney. It wasn't even about the sparring of arguments or the noise of politics. What happened on that stage was something much bigger, something that spoke to every viewer watching at home, to every immigrant family chasing opportunity, to every young American wondering if their voice, their story, their identity truly mattered. When Judge Edward Chen delivered that one line, it wasn't just aimed at Pam Bondi. It wasn't just a rebuttal to arrogance dressed as confidence. It was a message to the entire country. Dignity is not fragile. Truth is not weak. And the American story is not owned by the loudest voices in the room. It belongs to all of us. Think about the contrast we witnessed. On one side, bluster, interruptions, and thinly veiled jabs meant to exclude and divide. On the other, quiet resolve, unshakable patience, and the steady hand of someone who had lived the very values he defended. In that moment, America saw the difference between shouting to be heard and speaking so powerfully that silence follows. And isn't that the lesson? That integrity doesn't need to scream. That strength is not about volume, but about truth. That the real power in this country comes not from those who try to narrow the definition of American, but from those who live it, every day, in their struggles, in their service, in their resilience. For every person who has ever been told, "You don't belong," Chen's words were a lifeline. For every family who sacrificed everything to give their children a chance at a better life, his words were validation. And for every citizen who has felt drowned out by the chaos of politics, his calm clarity was a reminder. The noise doesn't define us. The values do. The aftermath of that moment may fade in headlines, but its moral weight will endure. Because it reminded us that the true test of leadership is not how loudly you can argue, but how deeply you can move people with a single, unshakable truth. And here's what makes it timeless. Chen didn't just win a debate. He reminded us that America's strength comes from embracing, not excluding. From dignity, not derision. From calm courage, not reckless arrogance. So as the dust settles, ask yourself, what kind of voice do we want shaping our future? The one that shouts the loudest, or the one that speaks with such clarity that the room falls silent? Pam Bondi brought fire to the stage, but Judge Chen left with something greater. He left with the truth. And in America, truth has a way of outlasting everything else. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all, that the next time someone tries to question your place, your worth, or your right to stand tall, you'll remember this moment. You'll remember the silence after Chen's words. And you'll know, you don't need to shout to prove who you are. You simply need to stand in your truth. Because in the end, that truth, our shared truth, is what makes us all American. And there you have it. One unforgettable moment that flipped the entire debate on its head. Judge Chen didn't just shut down Pam Bondi. He reminded the nation that integrity always has the final word. His calm, steady presence proved that no amount of arrogance or noise can overpower the truth when it's spoken with courage and conviction. This isn't just about politics. It's about the kind of America we want to live in. The kind where dignity outshines division, where voices of reason drown out the chaos, and where every one of us can stand tall, knowing we belong to this story. That's why Chen's words hit so hard. They weren't just for that stage or for that night. They were for every single person who's ever wondered if their place in this country truly mattered. And now, it's your turn. What did you feel when you heard his line? Did it strike a chord, make you think, make you proud? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your voice in this conversation. If you believe in amplifying truth over noise. If you believe that moments like this deserve to be seen and remembered, then do two simple things. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you never miss the next story. And share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that calm strength can shake the world. Because here, we're not just watching history, we're part of it. So until next time, remember this. Dignity is louder than hate. Truth is stronger than arrogance. And when we stand together, no voice can silence us.